สวัสดีค่ะยินดีต้อนรับเข้าสู่รายการ Tech Hustle Thailand กับดิฉันแพรทะแก้วกล้าวแก้วมังคลาค่ะก่อนอื่นนะคะแพรต้องขอบคุณสปอนเซอร์หลักของเรา แคทคาร Associates Asia Recruitment ซึ่งเป็นบริษัทจัดหางานนะคะที่มีความเชี่ยวชาญทางด้าน IT โดยเฉพาะเลยท่านผู้ฟังท่านใดที่สนใจข้อมูลเนี่ยสามารถไปตามลิงก์ใน show notes ได้เลยค่ะแล้ววันนี้นะคะ EP ที่18แพรมีคุณเดชพรพลนะคะเป็นเพื่อนร่วมงานของแพรเองนะคะแล้วก็เป็นโคโฮสต์ใน EP นี้จะมาพูดคุยกับแขกผู้มีเกียรติของเราซึ่งก็คือคุณอิสรานาคาวิสุทธ์นะคะคุณอิสราเนี่ยมีประสบการณ์ช่ำชองในวงการ IT มามากกว่า22ปีแล้วก็ได้มีโอกาสทำงานใน6ประเทศเลยด้วยกันนะคะรวมถึงทำในวงการสตาร์ทอัพในไทยด้วยโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งเนี่ยภายในวงการการเงินหรือว่า FinTech นะคะวันนี้คุณอิสราจะนำเราย้อนกลับไปสู่ยุคแรกเริ่มเลยนะคะของวงการเทคโนโลยีในช่วงปี 2000 ซึ่งในช่วงเวลานั้นเนี่ยเทคโนโลยีนะคะยังคงไม่ได้เป็นที่ถูกกล่าวขานเนาะมากถึงเท่าปัจจุบันนะคะนอกจากนั้นแล้วเนี่ยคุณอิสราก็คือจะมาแชร์ประสบการณ์การทำงานในระดับผู้บริหารจนถึงประสบการณ์การทำสตาร์ทอัพแล้วก็มุมมองที่มีต่อวัฒนธรรมวงการสตาร์ทอัพสมัยใหม่ด้วยค่ะยินดีต้อนรับค่ะ
Welcome back to Tech Hustle Thailand. Today I am super excited to introduce a new guest onto the show. He is a seasoned and globe-trotting individual within the Thai tech space, spanning the course of a 22-year career and counting across 6 countries with an affinity for financial tech and the startup sectors. Today, we will be covering his journey navigating through a complex period in the world of technology back in the year 2000, his approach to juggling multiple executive roles, his extensive lineup of startup experience, and ultimately his philosophy and goals towards the modern startup culture. I am very pleased to introduce Kun Isara NaคะVisut. Welcome to Tech Hustle Thailand ครับ Kun Isara.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So let us kick things off. Kun Isara, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Isra NaคะVisut. I have been working in the software industry internationally and locally for the past 22 years. I was born in the U.S., graduated in the U.S. I spent years, about 15 years in the U.S., starting with the semiconductor industry. After that, I returned to Thailand exactly on 4th of July, 2004. Then I started working with the software development on a web-based platform. Prior to this point, I worked on .NET applications, all .NET. But when I returned to Thailand, I started to change from .NET application to web-based application. And the reason was the industry in Thailand actually focused on web-based application development. As you know, Thailand is very focused on Node.js, React Native. These are all web-based application, and Thailand is also focused on mobile application development. So during my time in Thailand, I worked with very big banks, large size banks. I worked on a number of projects on mobile applications. So that's
right.
Pretty much sums up the 22 years.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. So you are currently in like your current employment is about 6 years now, right, Kun Isara?
Yes. Correct.
Great. Could you share the titles that you hold at the moment?
Actually, when you work in a bank, your title changes. You have the job rotation. Currently, I'm holding the position of project manager plus technical lead plus scrum master.
Wow. Okay, so you've worn many hats over your career. You are currently wearing a number of hats at the moment. So how do you handle the workload or having to switch your mindset to apply with the different responsibilities that comes with each role? Kunisarat.
Actually, holding multiple positions is actually necessary. As you know, as a project management is concerned, it actually involves many roles. Project management actually involve technical leadership, involve Scrum Master, and so if you hold multiple hats, it actually helps you. It actually helps you in assisting your teams. Sometimes the team members are new graduates. They don't have any experience. They need some sort of leadership. But if you can provide project leadership, you can provide project management leadership, you can provide technical leadership, you can provide Scrum Master leadership. It only helps the teammates, and when it helps the teammates, it actually helps your project.
Right, and I imagine with being hands-on in terms of both technical and leadership aspects, you also get to know your teammates better, and ultimately it just the platform and the project becomes better, right, Kunisarat?
Yes, actually, if you have lots of knowledge, lots of skills, actually your teammates will actually look up to you. And in working in a team environment, actually, the team respect and team leadership and working together is actually important, very important.
Absolutely, totally agreed. I think one thing that our listeners would be super interested in is when exactly were you exposed to your first leadership role or position? When was it?
I think it was in the U.S. In the U.S., I went through school in Texas actually, and I got my first job offer in Houston, Texas. But at that time, I was a programmer. After that, after Houston, Texas, I got promoted and moved to New Jersey. This is a time where I did lots of traveling, and when you do traveling, you automatically became like a global project manager because you're not going to be at the office, and you have to be somewhat independent when you travel. So I guess to answer your question, my very first time becoming the project manager was when I started traveling.
Right, I see. And okay, so let's just start from the very beginning, your roots. What was the thing that drew you towards the world of technology, Kunisarat?
Actually, I was in the US, and during that time, I went through my graduate school from the year 1998 to 2000. And as you can tell, the year 2000 represents Y2K period. Y2K period is actually the period when the calendar year changed from 1999 to 2000. That's the period where everybody thought that the world was coming to an end. Everybody thought that the plane will come crashing down onto the train on the ground. So at that time, if you're a programmer or software specialist, you were actually very much in needed, and you're
like hot property, right?
Yes, and you'll be paid very well if you study computer science at that time. So that was my motivation to study computer science.
Right. And yeah, I remember personally during that time, it was very confusing. Everyone was just running around, just wondering what tomorrow would be like. And just for some of our listeners who weren't like boots on the ground during that time, what was the ending of the Y2K like? When everyone, it kind of dawned on everyone that, oh, we may have overreacted a little bit.
Well, actually, the situation and the issue with Y2K at that time was actually real. Actually, at that time, the code was actually fixed. And if the code wasn't fixed at that time, there probably would be some major accidents. So the issue or the legend about Y2K was actually true at that time. And to answer your question, code was fixed. If it's not fixed, there will be like major consequences at that time.
Right. And it's an absolute pleasure to be able to sit and talk with someone who's been able to experience this entire and game-changing and crucial period for the world of technology. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kun Isara. So let's just jump into the main concept of this episode, which is about startups and the world around it. So personally, Kunisara, what are your thoughts towards startups, especially in the tech space?
Well, as you know, every new graduates in Gen Z, these days, everybody wants to own a business. Everybody wants to be independent. Everybody wants to be financially independent. So startup is a way for a, let's say, a young graduate or a young person to start a company without spending their own money.
Right, absolutely. So what kind of startups have you personally been involved with?
As you know, right now, COVID-19 is a very well-known issue. So many startup projects have been created from COVID-19 situation. As for myself, I've been involved with COVID-19 healthcare startup company.
Absolutely. And besides medical tech, what other industries have you been involved with as well?
Since I'm currently working in the financial industry, so as you know, there are many types of startup. One of which is very well known. It's called fintech. Mm-hmm. Fintech is actually a financial type of startup, and some of the fintech startup are actually funded by the bank itself. So that's what I've been involved with.
Right. And in terms of the financial tech space right now, what do you think is like the next big thing in terms of innovation?
If you're talking about fintech, fintech is currently moving toward cryptocurrency, which is very big, and it's actually drawing lots of applicants and applications for new graduates. If you're a new graduate, you'll be tempted to enter into fintech industry, and it will involve with cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency are actually connected somewhat in some way to blockchain for security.
I think that it's super interesting that you brought up cryptocurrency, because in of itself, it is an emerging market and it's gaining more and more popularity by the day. So it could actually be maybe considered like in the mentality of our topic, like kind of like a startup itself. It's an idea and it's kicking off, and at the present time it is growing. Do you think, Kunisara, that cryptocurrency may be the future of currency?
If you read the news, either in Facebook or on the online newspaper, you'll see that there are news about cryptocurrencies right now in China. There are news about cryptocurrency in the US. And for myself, my knowledge about startup with cryptocurrency, I was working for a startup company in Germany. So it has gone to Europe and US and Asia. And I think it's going to be a big thing coming.
Do you think that cryptocurrency has gone past the stage of early adopters and now maybe something that is here to stay? Kunisara.
I think cryptocurrency is here to stay, and there are many startups that capitalize on cryptocurrency, develop mobile application, and it can draw a number of new graduates to join them. So if you're a new graduate or you have a few years of experience in software development, this is an exciting time for graduates in computer science. As you know, computer science graduates are actually the major area of study that earns much money. They earn much more money than any
like any other industry.
Right.
Okay. So definitely in terms of the job market in technology, especially now with the involvement of COVID-19, everything has become digital, everything has become mobile. So the need for software solutions has increased 10, 20, maybe 100 times than it's ever been, right?
Correct.
Right. And and something that I feel a lot of listeners would be super interested in is like, because tech personnel has always been such hot property, do you think that this bubble might burst one day, that people in technology would maybe become like too many, like would there be too many people in the space that it kind of explodes, in your opinion?
Actually, I think right now the job market is actually in need of more programmers and software developers. They're actually in need, and we actually need more graduates, computer science graduates, to join the industry.
100%. I absolutely agree. Like, since the last 5 years, it has been just snowballing into this, to basically what it is right now. It's the place to be. It's where everyone wants to be involved with. And those like yourself who had the vision early on that, hey, technology is kind of, where it's at, I think this particular story would be a great inspiration towards the new generation, or maybe even the generation that's currently kickstarting their careers. They might be first jobbers, or kind of rounding back to our topic, people who are starting their own business. So, like, personally, what role has startups played in the industry in the past, and where do you think startups are going? Kunisara.
Well, actually, right now, big corporations and big companies or big banks actually they're actually afraid of the startups, because startups can be formed without much funding or much money to start with. So big corporations and big banks and big companies are actually scared of them. And I think, to answer your question, there's a good future for a startup to grow.
Right. And what do you think are the success factors for a budding or a beginning startup? Like what makes a good startup in your opinion?
Well, as you know, startup people who do startup don't need any funding because they're funded by investors. So the success factor for startup is for us as a startup guys to make money for investors. So that should be an ultimate goal, that to make money, to make profit for the investors. So the success factor for startup is for you to create a startup that can sell, that can make profit to the investors.
100% Kunisara. I think you hit it on the nail spot on there, which kind of brings up the next thing I wanted to discuss with you. Let's like in a way of kind of dissecting the mind of someone who's in the process of creating their own startup. It's between passion and profit, right? So there's two main opposing factors and super common quotes. So on the one side, there's if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. And the opposing side would be if you turn something you love into a job, then you slowly start losing that fire. You start losing that early on passion and motivation you had when you first came up with your concept or idea. So what would be the first mental steps towards a startup, Kunisara?
Well, I think you have to find the middle ground between your passion and profit making. Because if you do a startup without making any profits, what will happen is your investors will not be happy, and they probably will take back the funding, which will not be good. So you have to find a middle ground for your passion. Let's say you're interested in the industry of let's say food, healthy food.
Okay.
And then so you have to find the food that will sell. If you do a startup on like the food that people won't buy, that's probably not going to make much profit, and that's probably make the investors not happy.
Okay, so basically there has to be some sort of compromise, right? Kunisara?
Yes,
You
yes.
need to take everything with like a grain of salt, as the saying goes, right?
Actually, what's important for startup is you need the funding for your company or startup, and in order to get a good funding, you have to pitch your ideas to the investors. And what investors are interested in is your ability to make their money grow.
Totally agreed. Mhm.
So you have to find some middle ground. You can do what you like. You can follow your passion, but that passion must make some level of profit.
Okay. So if you yourself, Kun Isara, were going to give a crash course to someone who wants to have their own startup and they come and ask you, hi, Kun Isara, you're a person who's had a lot of experience in both technology, startups, across a number of industries. I have an idea. Where should I start now that I have this idea? What would the steps be?
These days there are stages for the for students and new graduates to pitch the ideas to the investors. Investors will actually sit down and listen to your ideas. So you should formalize your ideas into something that can be presented, and then you can present it on the stage to the investors.
Right. So not only would you need to have a great idea that you love that can sell, but you also need the courage and conviction to educate people on what your product or service is about, right, Kunisara?
Correct. So first of all, you need an idea, you need a business plan, but secondly, you have to be able to convince the investors that your idea is good. There's actually a difference between a good idea and a good idea that can be presented. So you need to be able to present it to the investors, and you need to convince investors that your product is good.
All right. Just from the top of your head, Kunisara, would you be able to give an example of a good idea and a good idea that can be presented?
Of course. For example, as you know, these days the hot issue is the COVID-19. So if you do something about COVID-19, do something that about software implementation about COVID-19, it will sell. Definitely, it will sell to the hospitals. And as you know, hospitals are well funded. They have lots of funding to give to the startups. So to give you a good example, if you do a project on COVID-19 on, let's say, monitoring tool to monitor the the people who come into the hospital for vaccination. This is a hot issue. You know, the vaccination comes in different flavors, especially in Thailand. There are many brands, and there's still some issues with the people not getting vaccinated. So hospitals needs the help, on the software help on this. So if you can provide help, provide platform, provide software automation to the hospital, this idea will definitely sell.
Absolutely. So, with the emergence of COVID-19, I believe it was in 2019, right, Kunisara, a number of software platforms have come up in terms of claiming the vaccine, checking whether the vaccine will be available to you at all. So, do you think that some of the early software platforms were slapped together a little too quickly? Maybe they could have put a little bit more thought into it, or were they right to be first, basically, Kunisara?
As far as the COVID-19 startup, I don't think there's enough startup now, because some of the startup companies, some of them are actually not geared toward COVID-19. Some of them are geared toward cryptocurrency. Some of them geared toward drone implementation. So if you focus your efforts on COVID-19 startup, I think there can be a good challenge and good success on your way.
That is great input, Kun Israt. So now that we've discussed the ins and outs of startups, what's a good startup, what's an idea that can sell, some of the new emerging concepts right now in the world of technology, what ideas do you personally have for your own startup, Kun Israt?
As for myself, I'm interested in actually, as you know, some startups are geared toward COVID-19. There are some, but not enough. Some people are geared toward IoT, Internet of Things, robotic system. Some people are geared toward fintech. But I myself, actually would like to do some startup for semiconductor, because The reason is I would like to do something that nobody else has done before, because if you do that, your product will sell because you have less competitors.
Okay.
Yes.
So for our listeners, could you paint a clearer picture exactly of what the world of semiconductors look like in your perspective, Kunisarat?
Yes. As you know, in all devices, mobile phones, television, radio, airplanes, everything these days is computerized. Everything is computerized, so it requires a computer chip. Okay, and it's made by as you know, in computer or notebook or PC or MacBook, they're made of a little chip and called Intel or AMD.
Uh-huh.
These are made in the factories. It's made in many factories span across many countries, America, Europe, Asia. And if you're familiar with the Samsung mobile phones, that's semiconductor factory in South Korea.
Okay.
So if the audience is interested in this industry, the one startup that will be a good idea is a startup on automation, factory automation, because the factory automation in semiconductor will actually boost the production. Right now, all the factories, all the semiconductor factories are they actually employ human beings, which if you assist human beings with some robotic system, it can boost the production very much.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, yeah, that would more or less be a new direction in terms of semiconductors. To be quite honest, I also agree with you that it is an untapped market because there's just not a lot of competitors, as you said just now. And if you've got a great idea and you can ultimately execute it, I think that would grow into something super special one day. Couldn't Isarat?
Right.
So absolutely. Uh-huh.
Yes. As I mentioned, if you're making startup or you create a startup company, you want to start up on something that can sell. And if it's something that nobody else does, you're the first one. You're the starter of such a product. It will definitely sell if you're the only person who does it.
And yeah, that is great advice and super inspirational. So before we wrap up this episode, could you share with us what your next steps in your career? Where do you see your career going? Let's say in the next year, the next 2 years. Where do you see yourself going right now, Kunisarat?
Well, actually, as you know, the technology is most fast. Right now, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if you're a PHP programmer, PHP
Right.
developer, you're actually very much valued and needed. But right now, if you're a PHP developer and you apply for a job, you're probably and will likely be rejected. So the time is different. PHP was once very good. People who study computer science are required to write PHP program, and at one time, PHP programmer are valued and needed. But right now, things are different. So right now, it's an era for single page architecture like Node.js.
Right.
And for my future, I would like to follow the technology of single page architecture some more.
That is great. Thank you so much for sharing. So, yeah, that wraps it up. So, our topic today was getting to know who Kun Isra is and what he's done in the past and his present and ultimately his future. But we've also covered the world of startups as well, which is something Kun Isra is very passionate about. So I want to thank you very much, Kun Isra, for joining us on this episode. Yeah, I think that is a wrap. Thank you very much, Kun Isra.
Thank you.
All right.